The lamps are different, but the light is the same. There are moments when a single line doesn't just resonate, it rearranges something subtly within you. This beautiful insight from the genius of Rumi was one of them. Because what if the differences we see in belief systems, in language, in mythology, even in one another, are not evidence of separation, but simply variations of form? And what if the shapes change, the stories change, the names change, but the essence does not? Rumi's words point to something both simple and vast, that while the lamps may differ, the light they carry is singular. And perhaps for much of human history, we've been a little too preoccupied with looking at the lamps. Across cultures and centuries, civilizations have turned their gaze toward the sun, that ever-present source of warmth, growth, rhythm, and renewal. It is the most visible giver of life, the quiet constant around which our days, seasons, and survival have always revolved. And yet, for many of us, the sun has been subtly framed in a particular way. In much of the modern Western world, both the sun and the divine have long been cast in masculine terms: powerful, singular, authoritative. God is often imagined as a father, a king, an old man in the sky. The sun too is frequently described through this same lens: dominant, blazing, commanding the heavens. These associations can feel so familiar that they almost appear as natural, as though light itself has always been masculine. But this was not always the case. In many ancient traditions, the sun was feminine, a living, breathing presence of light embodied in goddesses of dawn, fire, illumination, and life itself. Not distant or ruling from above, but intimately woven into the cycles of the earth, rising, returning, nourishing, and renewing. From Eostra, the bringer of spring and rising light, Amaterasu, the Japanese sun goddess whose retreat into a cave plunged the world into darkness, only to return and restore it. Brigid, keeper of flame and inspiration, Isis, sovereign of magic, resurrection, and cosmic wisdom. Sol, who drives the sun across the North sky. Saule of the Baltic lands. Ushas of the Vedic hymns. All radiant expressions of a singular force, not passive, not secondary, but luminous, generative, and life-giving, a solar feminine. These figures, scattered across vastly different geographies and time, begin to feel less like separate deities and more like echoes, reflections of a deeper archetype humanity once recognized instinctively. That light itself is both radiant and receptive, powerful and nurturing. And yet, over time, something shifted. As society's centralized power and authority became increasingly consolidated, spiritual systems did not evolve in isolation. They were shaped, curated, and in many cases controlled. What had once been an expression of balance, masculine and feminine, sun and moon, creation and dissolution, was gradually restructured into something more singular, more hierarchical, and overwhelmingly masculine in form. The many became one. But this was not simply a natural progression of belief, it was a narrowing, and in that narrowing something vital was diminished. The feminine divine was not always erased outright. It was more often absorbed, softened, or strategically repositioned. Powerful goddesses became supporting figures. Sovereign forces were recast as passive vessels. In some cases they were revered, but only within limits that no longer threatened the emerging structures of authority. What remained was not balance, but imbalance presented as order, because a system built on hierarchy requires constant reinforcement, and one of the most effective ways to reinforce it is through the image of the divine itself. If God is singular, masculine, and ruling from above, it becomes far easier to mirror that structure within society, to justify control, to legitimize dominance, to define power in one direction only. Over time, this framing did more than reshape theology. It reshaped perception. It influenced who was seen as authoritative, who was trusted with knowledge, who was permitted to lead, to heal, to speak, to create. It altered the perceived value of intuition, emotion, and receptivity, also known as meekness. But that's a whole other episode. These qualities, long associated with the feminine, were recast as secondary, unreliable, weak, or even dangerous. And in doing so, it did not just suppress the feminine in myth, it suppressed it in humanity. This was not merely a shift in story, it was a shift in self-perception. Because when the image of the divine changes, so too does the way we see ourselves. And then quietly, language offers another doorway. At first glance, the thread seems obvious. Sol, the sun, the root of solar, solstice, and the great celestial constant around which life turns. But then came the others: solution, solidarity, solitude. From a linguistic perspective, these words are not related. They emerge from entirely different Latin roots. Solvere, to loosen, solidus, whole, solus, alone. Their shared spelling is, by all academic accounts, a coincidence, but even that word invites a closer look. Coincidence comes from the Latin coincidere, to fall together, a term once used in geometry and mathematics to describe points that occupy the same space, meeting precisely, exactly at once. So not randomness, convergence. And suddenly the idea shifts, because while a linguist might say these words grew from different seeds, a philosopher might observe that they have fallen together, not in origin or structure, but in meaning and resonance. To solve is to loosen, to untangle what is bound. To be solid is to be whole, unified, undivided. To be in solitude is to return to oneself, to stand alone yet complete. Different roots, different meanings, and still they seem to orbit a similar center. It begins to feel as though the architecture of language, whether by design, intuition, or something more subtle, gestures toward a deeper pattern. That the minds who shaped these words across time and place were not necessarily connected to one another, but perhaps they were drawing from the same well. Different voices, same current. Because what are the chances that such distinct linguistic paths would converge so neatly around ideas of release, wholeness, and inner alignment? A coincidence? Perhaps. Or something quietly coinciding. It is as though language itself remembers something we are still in the process of understanding. That enlightenment, like the sun, requires a loosening of what binds, a return to wholeness, and the quiet space to receive it. Which brings us back to the light itself. If the names differ and the stories differ and even the words themselves diverge in origin, what is it that remains? What is the light? Well, it has been called many things: consciousness, awareness, spirit, life force, energy. In scientific language, we might speak of photons, packets of light carrying information across space. In spiritual traditions, it's often called divine presence. Different lamps, same illumination. Not something owned, not something divided, but something that moves through all things, animating, connecting, and expressing. And this is not merely poetic. From a scientific perspective, light holds a uniquely foundational role in the architecture of reality. Photons, massless particles that carry electromagnetic energy, are constant, pervasive, and essential to life as we know it. They travel at the same speed regardless of the observer, forming one of the true constants in physics. In a very real sense, they are the messengers of the universe, linking space, time, and matter together. Life too is inseparable from light, from the photosynthesis that fuels ecosystems to the subtle biophotonic emissions observed within living organisms. Light is not just something we see, it is something we are in relationship with continuously. So it begins to feel less like a metaphor and more like a signature, a kind of energetic breath linking the material and the immaterial, the physical and the conscious. We are, at our core, not static objects, but living configurations of energy, frequency, and light, momentary expressions of a vast and intelligent field that permeates everything. And if one were to consider the idea of the divine as something omnipresent, foundational, and woven into all of existence, it becomes difficult to ignore the quiet parallel. Light is everywhere. It carries information. It connects what would otherwise appear separate. It exists beyond the constraints of mass, not as a figure, not as a form, but as a principle. As Albert Einstein once reflected, "My religion consists of a humble admiration of the illimitable superior spirit who reveals himself in the slight details we're able to perceive with our frail and feeble minds." A recognition not of a distant authority, but of an intelligence embedded within the fabric of reality itself. Not an old man in the sky, but something far more subtle, far more pervasive, a kind of light-coded architecture, quietly expressing itself through everything. For a long time, the divine has been framed through the lens of authority, a distant figure, a ruler, a judge. But what if that was never the essence of it? What if the true nature of Source is not something to be feared, but something to be embodied? Not a force of control, but of radiance, illumination, a field of high, coherent consciousness, not imposed from above, but available to be tuned to. The brightest light in the lamp that is us, not separate from us, but expressed through us. Light not as heaviness, but as lightness, expansive, alive, generative, and inherently balanced. Not masculine at the expense of the feminine, but the harmonious interplay of both. The determined act of asking and the graceful openness to receive. The sun and the space that allows its light to land. Because true power does not emerge from dominance, it emerges from inner balance, from coherence, and from alignment with something far more intelligent than control. You may have been taught to search for the light, to chase it, to earn it, to prove yourself worthy of it, but the light was never absent. It has always been here, steady, radiant, expanding, waiting not to be found, but to be realized. The lamps are different, the stories are different, the names are different, but the light has always been the same. Light in its truest sense is not something we force, it is something we allow. It reveals, it releases, it lifts. And as Rumi so eloquently reminds us, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. If you're interested in reading more, my full work, The Book of Revolution, is available globally now.